Last Count Corla. Taoiseach, I wonder whether in your discussion with Macron, was there, it was the French Prime Minister, my apologies, was there discussion about what was then an upcoming decision by the European Commission since made to effectively tighten the screws on Palestinian aid when Gaza has been reduced to rubble and when people are left without food, water, fuel? In the aftermath of the 7th of October, the European Commission announced that it was going to review Palestinian development aid from the European Union. It completed that review and it found that existing safeguards, quote, work well, and said, quote, no evidence has been found to date that money has been diverted for unintended purposes. But then why on earth has the Commission planning to impose stricter controls on an aid system that hasn't had any problems, that there hasn't been any diverting of funds? The consequence is that 39 million euros of money owed or due for NGOs and civil society organisations is being held up until new paperwork is submitted. This money is urgently needed on the ground, and this happens in the context whereby aid to Palestine has decreased dramatically since Hungary's Várhelyi took over as the relevant commissioner, and the role of the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who obviously originally went to Israel and gave a green light for the genocidal policy that has been unleashed. So I wonder whether you discussed it with the French Prime Minister and whether the Irish Government is opposed to this restriction.
Just to say, in relation to my conversations with Prime Minister Bourne, it was a few weeks ago. It was before the ceasefire was in place, so our focus was on the ceasefire rather than the medium or long term, and also was, I think, a day or two after she had participated in the anti-Semitism march in Paris. So we talked about that too, and the concerns we both have about rising anti-Semitism and rising Islamophobia. From the Irish Government's point of view, we very much welcome the ceasefire in Gaza. It's facilitated the release of hostages taken by Hamas and also prisoners taken by Israel, many of whom are just teenage boys, or rather are teenage boys, in some cases subject to administrative detention for throwing stones. But it's also allowed humanitarian aid and supplies into the territory, which is really important. And we're calling for an extended ceasefire so that all hostages can be released, and all hostages should be released, that civilians can get further relief, and that the killing can stop. And when we say ceasefire, to be very clear, we mean a ceasefire observed by all sides and all parties to the conflict. Just in relation to EU aid to Palestine, this has trebled, and we've increased our own aid to the occupied Palestinian territories through UNRWA and other bodies, and we're not in favour of any new unnecessary restrictions on aid. We know from the aid that we provide to the area and the EU provides that if there is any evidence of it being somehow misappropriated, that evidence is extremely weak, and I welcome the report on it. In relation to sanctions, I can only say what I said before. I don't believe sanctions work if they're unilateral. They likely backfire because there would be retaliation, and that's the truth of it. And the whole point of one country imposing sanctions on another is that it should do more harm to the country that you're imposing the sanctions on than to yourself. So I think sanctions can only work if they're done on a multilateral basis, and they only worked with respect to South Africa because they were done on a multilateral basis. No, definitely, we discussed the need for a ceasefire, and thankfully we have that now, and that has facilitated the release of hostages and prisoners and allowed aid to get into Gaza. We didn't talk about the medium or long term. And then just to say on the other matter, I spoke to our ambassador to Israel last night. She's one of a number of EU ambassadors who were summoned in, and I can assure you that she was able to both explain and defend the position of the Irish Government in relation to all these matters.